For 400 years, the scholars of Christian Europe had a single name for him. They called him the Commentator, as though no other explanation of Aristotle were ever needed. His real name was Ibn Rushd, and he was born in Cordova in 1126. The Latin world bent it into Averroes, and under that name he became a legend. The legend says he was Aristotle's faithful voice, a patient explainer of another man's thought. The legend is wrong. Ibn Rushd was among the most dangerous thinkers either civilization ever produced. His books were condemned by Muslim authorities and burned, and he himself was driven into exile. Decades after his death, the church in Paris condemned the doctrines that carried his name. Both religions sensed the same threat, and both were right to sense it. He had made one enormous bet with his entire life. He bet that reason and revealed religion, pursued honestly, can never finally contradict each other. The wager sounds safe, even pious, until you follow it where he followed it. It led him to a world with no beginning, and a God who may not know your name. It led him to claim that the very mind doing your thinking is not yours. This is the story of that bet, and of how far one mind will go to honour it. Part 1. The Verdict that Buried Philosophy. To understand Ibn Rushd, you first have to understand the catastrophe he was born into. A century before him, philosophy in the Islamic world stood at an extraordinary height. Thinkers like Al-Farabi and Avicenna had built vast systems fusing Greek reason with Islam. They treated philosophy as the highest road to truth, capable of proving even the nature of God. Then a single man wrote a single book, and the prestige of that project collapsed. The man was Al-Ghazali, and the book was The Incoherence of the Philosophers. It would be easy to picture Ghazali as an enemy of reason, but that picture is false. He was himself a master logician, perhaps the finest mind of his age. His charge was not that reasoning is bad, but that the philosophers had cheated. They had dressed up shaky metaphysical guesses in the costume of mathematical certainty. On most questions, Ghazali was content to argue that their proofs simply failed. On 3 questions, he went much further, and the consequence was deadly. On 3 doctrines, Ghazali declared the philosophers to be not merely wrong, but unbelievers. The first was their claim that the world is eternal and had no beginning. The second was their claim that God knows only universal truths, not particular events. The third was their denial that the dead will rise again in their bodies. To brand a Muslim an unbeliever was not an academic insult in that world. It could carry the penalty of death. The traditional story says that Ghazali's blow killed philosophy in the Sunni heartland. Recent scholarship has complicated that story, and rightly so. Philosophy survived in the eastern lands, took new forms, and even Ghazali used its tools constantly. But the perception of a wound was real, and the discipline lost its public confidence. Philosophy became something practiced quietly, defensively, under suspicion of corrupting the faith. That is the wreckage into which our subject walks 2 generations later. Here is the first strange thing about Ibn Rushd. The great defence of Greek philosophy did not come from the East, where it had flourished. It came from the far western edge of the Islamic world, from Muslim Spain and Morocco, and it came from a man who was at the same time a chief judge and a royal physician. He was no marginal freethinker scribbling against the establishment from outside it. He was the establishment. His family tells you most of what you need to know about his position. The Ibn Rushds were a dynasty of judges, pillars of the religious and legal order of Cordova. His grandfather, who carried the same name, was a famous jurist of the Maliki school, so the philosopher is sometimes called the grandson, to keep the two apart. This matters more than a footnote, because it shapes the whole character of his project. His defense of philosophy was mounted from inside religious orthodoxy, not against it. The turning point of his career was a single conversation. The Almohad ruler Abu Yaqub Yusuf, a prince with intellectual tastes, summoned him to court. The ruler complained that Aristotle's writings were obscure and asked for someone to make them clear. Ibn Rushd took the commission, and out of it came the work of his life. He would later serve as chief physician to the caliph in Marrakesh. For a time the judge, the doctor and the philosopher rose together. It did not end well, and the reasons are still debated. Late in his life, Ibn Rushd fell out of favour with the Almohad rulers. Under pressure that was partly political and partly religious, his philosophical works were condemned. He was exiled to a town southeast of Cordova, his books restricted, some reportedly burned. He was rehabilitated near the very end, but he died in 1198 in disgrace's long shadow. The man Europe would crown as the Commentator died a suspect figure in his own land. Now we reach the second strange thing, which concerns the commentaries themselves. Why would a thinker of such power devote his life to explaining a Greek who died 15 centuries earlier? The answer is that Ibn Rushd believed Aristotle had very nearly perfected human knowledge. He wrote that no one in all the centuries since had added a word worth attention. To us this sounds bizarre, a claim that science had essentially been finished long ago. But for Ibn Rushd it set a precise and radical task. If Aristotle had got it right, then the goal was not to surpass him, but to recover him. And recovery meant stripping away the distortions that later thinkers had layered on top. His chief target here was Avicenna, whose grand system had mixed Aristotle with Neoplatonic ideas. Ibn Rushd thought this blend had buried the real Aristotle under foreign material. So commentary for him was not humble footnoting in the margins of a greater book. It was the aggressive project of getting Aristotle right against centuries of contamination. He pursued this in layers, writing more than one kind of commentary on the same work. Scholars traditionally sort them into three types, by depth and ambition. There were short summaries, fuller middle paraphrases, and the great line-by-line long commentaries of his maturity. Recent scholars doubt whether this neat scheme really captures how varied his methods were. The point to hold is the sheer scale and seriousness of the enterprise. He covered nearly the entire body of Aristotle's work, sometimes 3 times over. Which brings us to a puzzle that has divided his readers for over a century and a half. In the 1850s, the scholar Ernest Renan painted a portrait of 2 Averroes. One was the public man, the pious judge who wrote that faith and reason agree, The other was a secret philosopher whose true convictions were heretical and concealed. On this reading, the faithful commentator was a mask over a far more radical mind. The careful orthodox surface hid a dangerous interior. Later, scholars rebelled against this split and argued for a single unified Ibn Rushd. The jurist, the physician, and the philosopher on this view are one coherent person, not two. The harmony he preached between reason and faith was sincere, not a strategic disguise. Which reading is correct is not a settled matter, and we will return to it more than once. Was the faithful follower of Aristotle truly faithful, or was the commentary a kind of cover? To even begin answering that, we have to watch him think, and the first thing to grasp is his theory of how thinking reaches the truth at all. Part 2. Who is allowed to reason? Start with something that happens constantly and that we rarely examine. Two intelligent, sincere people consider the same question and reach opposite conclusions. Our instinct is to say that one of them must simply be reasoning badly. Ibn Rushd saw something deeper and more unsettling beneath that instinct. He thought arguments come in fundamentally different kinds, with different powers to compel, and which kind can move you depends on what kind of mind you bring. This is not a claim about intelligence in the sense of raw cleverness. It is a claim about training and about the type of premise a person can grasp as binding. To see it, you have to understand a precise idea Ibn Rushd took from Aristotle's logic. Every genuine argument he held shares the same underlying form, the structure of the syllogism. What separates a powerful argument from a weak one is not its form, but its matter. The matter of an argument means the kind of premises it starts from. On this basis, he sorted all reasoning into 5 kinds, ranked by the certainty they yield. The highest is demonstration, which begins from premises that are necessary and cannot be otherwise. Below it is dialectic, which begins from premises that are merely widely accepted and reputable. Below that is rhetoric, which begins from what an audience already feels and finds persuasive. Lower still is poetry, which works through images that move us rather than propositions that bind us. And at the bottom sits sophistry, which uses premises that only appear true and deceive. The machinery is identical in every case, which is the surprising part of the doctrine. The same logical skeleton can carry a mathematical proof or a piece of political propaganda. The difference lies entirely in whether the starting points are certain, reputable, persuasive, or fake. Take a proof in geometry as the clearest example of the highest kind. Once you truly see why the angles of a triangle sum as they do, you cannot coherently doubt it. The conclusion is forced on you, with a necessity that leaves no room to wriggle free. Now set that beside a skilled courtroom advocate or a champion debater. Such a person argues from premises the audience already grants, and can often argue either side. The result may be reputable and reasonable, but it is not certain in the geometer's sense. Lower again, consider a politician rousing a crowd before an election. The speaker reaches not for proofs, but for the feelings and images the crowd already holds. That is persuasion, and it can be overwhelming, but it proves nothing at all. Ibn Rushd adds a sober qualification that keeps him from being a naive worshipper of proof. Demonstration itself, he says, comes in stronger and weaker varieties. In mathematics, we can often build the perfect kind, where premises supply the very cause of the conclusion. But in the study of nature, and even in metaphysics, that ideal is usually out of reach. There we cannot start from causes, because the causes are hidden and the effects are what we see. So we reason backward, from observed effects to their probable causes, in what he calls a sign. This means certainty itself comes in degrees, and the hardest sciences sit lower on the scale. A proof that argues from an effect to its cause is real, but it is less secure than a mathematical one. Hold on to this, because it will matter enormously when he turns to proving God. For now, the lesson is that even the summit of reason is not equally firm in every domain. Demonstration is the goal, but the world does not always permit its purest form. Ibn Rushd is a rationalist, but a clear-eyed one. From this map of arguments follows a map of people, and here the doctrine grows teeth. Because arguments divide into kinds, human beings divide by which kind can actually move them. The overwhelming majority of people Ibn Rushd holds are reached only through rhetoric. They are persuaded by vivid images and by what they already accept, not by chains of proof. A smaller group, the religious theologians, operate in the register of dialectic, and a tiny minority, the genuine philosophers, can follow a demonstration to its end. It is crucial to read this correctly, because it looks uglier than it is. Ibn Rushd is not ranking human worth, and he is not saying most people cannot reach truth. He is saying the same truth can be reached by three different routes of conviction. The philosopher arrives by proof, the theologian by reputable argument, the ordinary believer by image. All three can possess the truth, but only the demonstrative route possesses it with certainty. The destination is shared, even when the roads are utterly different in their reliability. His attitude toward the middle group, the theologians, is sharp and nearly contemptuous. Their dialectic, he charges, manufactures the illusion of certainty without the substance. They take merely reputable premises and parade them as if they had been proven. Worse, they air these clever reconstructions in front of the masses who cannot follow them. In doing so, they unsettle simple faith while putting nothing certain in its place. Ibn Rushd thinks the chief use of studying fallacies is diagnosing the errors of these theologians. We live inside this taxonomy every day, even though we rarely name it. A mathematical proof, a verdict beyond reasonable doubt, an advertisement and a poem are not one thing in four strengths. They trade in entirely different currencies of conviction, exactly as Ibn Rushd described. Watch how a single claim about a public health measure travels through a society. To specialists, it is offered as statistics, to policy debaters as reasonable argument, to the public as a vivid story. Each audience is won or lost by something the others would barely notice. So Ibn Rushd has built a hierarchy with the certainty of demonstration at its peak. But that peak is reachable by very few, and in its purest form, only in mathematics. Almost all of human life is lived far below it, in the wide country of the probable. It is lived in courts of law, at the bedsides of the sick, and in the governing of cities. So a hard question presses in on him. If certainty is this rare, how does reason work where certainty is impossible? Ibn Rushd did not face that question as an armchair theorist, but as a working judge and a practicing physician. Part 3. The Judge and the Physician. Consider two people on an ordinary working day, each facing the same kind of trouble. A judge confronts a dispute that the law was never written to anticipate. A doctor confronts a patient whose body refuses to behave like any textbook. In both cases, there are general rules and an endless supply of particular situations that the rules do not quite fit. How do you reason from the universal down to the single case, when the cases are infinite? Ibn Rushd spent his entire working life inside that problem. We tend to file his philosophy in one drawer and his day jobs in another. That is a mistake, because the same deep idea drives his law and his medicine alike. For years he served as a chief judge, and he wrote a major work on jurisprudence. It is called the Distinguished Jurist's Primer, and its design was genuinely original. Most legal writing of his day was an endless heap of individual rulings. Case was piled on case, the schools disagreed, and the branches multiplied without limit. Ibn Rushd regarded that heap as a swamp, and he refused to add another stone to it. His aim was not to catalogue more rulings, but to find the causes of the disagreements. Why exactly do equally learned jurists reach opposite verdicts on the same matter? Usually it traces to a different reading of a text, or a different weighting of analogy. If you grasp the roots of the disagreement, you can extract the general rules that generate it. And armed with those rules, the jurist can decide cases that no one has ever seen. He says this plainly, that his interest is the rules governing the law, not the endless branches. Behind this lies a striking claim about how much certainty law can ever provide. Jurists call their analogical reasoning by the same Arabic word the logicians use for the syllogism. Ibn Rushd flatly refuses the equation, and the refusal is deliberate. A true syllogism deduces the unknown from the known with binding necessity. Legal analogy, he insists, yields only opinion, a probable judgment, never a proof. He guarded this boundary with something close to stubbornness. In the Arabic translation of Aristotle, someone had slipped the word for jurisprudence into the text on logic. Ibn Rushd simply ignored it, declining to let law dress itself in the robes of demonstration. He even warned that studying law and logic as if they were one craft would ruin your grasp of both. Each science, he held, has its own kind of rigour and its own ceiling of certainty. Law lives in the realm of the reputable and the probable, never the demonstrative. Now turn to the other half of his working life, the body rather than the law. Ibn Rushd was chief physician to the Caliph, and he wrote a sweeping medical encyclopedia. He also wrote commentaries on Galen and on a medical poem by Avicenna himself. That last fact quietly undercuts the cliché that he and Avicenna were nothing but rivals. He praised Avicenna's poem as better than most introductions to the art. But his deepest claim about medicine is the one that should stop us. Medicine, Ibn Rushd says, is not a science at all. It is an art, and a particular kind of art. Set against this, the view we instinctively hold today. We treat medicine as applied science, the body as a machine, the doctor as its mechanic. Ibn Rushd locates the precise point where that picture breaks. He divides the arts into those of necessity and those of possibility. In carpentry, if you cut the joint correctly, it holds, and the result follows necessarily. Medicine is not like that, and pretending otherwise is dangerous. A physician can do everything correctly and watch the patient die anyway. The intended end simply does not follow with necessity from the right action. So the goal of medicine, he argues, cannot be to heal without fail. Its goal is to act appropriately, in the right measure, at the right moment, and then to wait. He compares the doctor to a ship's navigator and to a general commanding an army. The comparison is exact and worth dwelling on for a moment. A navigator acts with full skill under winds and seas he does not control. He is judged by his seamanship, not by whether a storm he could not prevent sinks the ship. The physician stands in the same relation to disease and to the stubborn facts of a body. He acts well or badly, and that is what lies within his power to determine. The outcome belongs partly to forces no art can command. Now the two halves of his life snap into a single shape. In law and in medicine alike, Ibn Rushd faces the same structure of knowledge. On one side stand the universals, the principles, the foundations, the general rules of the art. On the other side lies an unlimited field of particular cases that no book could ever contain. His medical encyclopedia is, by its own title, a book of the universals of medicine. It teaches the principles deliberately, and not a long list of remedies. He attacks doctors who only memorize remedies without ever grasping the universal method. Such physicians, he says bluntly, will make errors, as the doctors of his own time did. Yet he is equally clear that the universals alone are not enough to heal anyone. Once you hold the principles, you still need experience to read the case in front of you. And that experience, he writes, cannot be set down in any book, because the particulars are unlimited. The perfect practitioner holds the universal rule and can deduce in the single case what it demands. This is practical wisdom, the bridge from the general principle to the irreducibly particular moment. And it is, almost unchanged, the central tension of modern medicine. Evidence-based protocols give us universal rules drawn from large populations of patients. The clinician at the bedside still faces this patient, who may not behave like the population. The whole modern argument between protocol and clinical judgment is Ibn Rushd's problem in new clothes. The rule covers everyone in general and no one in particular. His definition of medicine by process rather than outcome survives in our law as well. We judge a doctor by whether they acted competently, not simply by whether the patient lived. That is the modern standard of care, and it is the navigator in the storm once again. Skill, not the weather, is what we hold a person responsible for. Ibn Rushd had mapped this terrain 8 centuries before our hospitals and our courts. The art that acts under uncertainty is still the art we practice. So Ibn Rushd has now charted reason across its whole range, from summit to valley. At the top, the certainty of demonstration, reachable by very few. Below it, the probable verdicts of the jurist and the skilled actions of the physician. and reaching all of them at once, philosopher and judge and simple believer alike, stands revealed religion. Religion claims to be true, and true for everyone, across every level of mind. So he could not escape the question his entire civilization was tearing itself apart over. When the highest form of reason reaches a conclusion, the plain words of Scripture seem to deny which one must yield. His answer to that is the single most consequential thing he ever wrote. Part 4. Truth does not oppose. Truth. Picture a believer who is also a serious thinker and who has just hit a wall. Read plainly, Scripture says the world was made at a moment in time. It says God attends to each person and that the dead will rise again in their flesh. But demonstrative philosophy, followed without flinching, seems to press in the opposite direction. The believer feels cornered into a brutal choice between two betrayals. Betray your reason or betray your faith. Ghazali had effectively told such a person to choose faith and condemn the reasoners. Ibn Rushd's response is to reject the choice itself as a false one. His argument appears in a short, explosive work called The Decisive Treatise. The first thing to notice is where he plants his feet, which is inside the law, not outside it. He does not argue that philosophy deserves a grudging tolerance from religion. He argues that religion positively commands it. His evidence is the text of the Quran itself, which he reads with a lawyer's precision. Again and again, he points out, it calls human beings to reflect on the created world. It urges them to consider the heavens and the earth, to study the order of things. And the most rigorous possible form of such reflection is demonstrative philosophy. So, for anyone capable of it, philosophy is not merely allowed, but obligatory. Revelation itself, on his reading, makes the study of Aristotle a religious duty. This inverts Ghazali completely, and that inversion is the whole strategy. Ghazali had made philosophy suspect, a possible road to unbelief. Ibn Rushd makes the neglect of philosophy the sin, at least for those fit to pursue it. Then he states the principle that gives the treatise its name and its force. Lay it out as the near syllogism it really is, with the premises exposed. The reasoning is tighter than its famous slogan suggests. The first premise is that the revealed law is true. The second premise is that genuine demonstration also yields truth, and yields it with certainty. The conclusion follows at once. Demonstration cannot truly contradict the law. Truth does not oppose truth, he writes, but agrees with it and bears witness to it. Two things that are both true cannot stand in real contradiction. If they seem to clash, the clash must be only apparent. That last move is where everything interesting happens. Suppose a sound demonstration appears to contradict a verse of Scripture. Then one of two things must be true, and only two. Either the demonstration is secretly flawed, and you have reasoned badly somewhere, or the apparent meaning of the verse is not in fact its real meaning, and it is the second option that opens the door to his whole system of reading. When proof and the surface of a text collide, the text must be read allegorically. Scripture, Ibn Rushd holds, speaks in images and apparent meanings for the sake of the many. Beneath that outer skin lies an inner sense that demonstration is able to recover. Take a verse that pictures God in bodily terms, seated upon a throne. The ordinary believer takes it literally, is comforted, and comes to no harm. The philosopher knows by proof that God is not a body, and reads the throne as a symbol. Notice that the three kinds of mind from earlier now do real work. The same single verse functions differently for each of the three audiences. For the rhetorical many, the image simply is the truth, in the only form they can hold. You must not disturb that image with allegory, or you dissolve their faith and leave them nothing. For the philosophers, the hidden inner meaning is the truth in its demonstrated form. The deepest reading must therefore be kept esoteric, reserved for those few who can bear it. This is a hard saying, and Ibn Rushd means it as a kind of mercy. To hand the masses the philosopher's allegories, he thinks, is a cruelty, not a gift. It strips away a faith they can use and offers a proof they cannot follow. He aims much of this anger, once again, at the theologians. They are the ones who debate God's nature loudly in front of people unequipped to judge. In doing so, he charges, they manufacture far more doubt than they ever resolve. There is one more piece of his treatment of religion that shows the same rationalist nerve. How do we even know that revelation is true in the first place? The theologians answered with miracles, with the prophet who walks on water or splits the moon. Such wonders, they said, prove his authority beyond question. Ibn Rushd is strikingly unmoved by this line of argument. A miracle, he says, is at best an external sign, with no inner link to the claim it supports. His comparison is sharp. A miracle stands to prophecy the way an oath stands to the truth of a statement. Swearing loudly that something is true adds no genuine connection to whether it is true. The real proof of a prophet, for him, is the law that the prophet brings. It is whether that law actually works to make human beings flourish across all conditions. The Quran proves Muhammad, on this view, not by suspending nature, but by the wisdom of its guidance. Revelation is authenticated by its content and its effects, not by spectacle. Now we have to put the strongest possible pressure on this elegant system, because hidden inside the harmony is something that looks a great deal like a bomb. Ibn Rushd has built, in effect, a religion of two tiers. There is the demonstrated truth for the elite, and the comforting image for the crowd. And the elite are forbidden from telling the crowd what they actually believe. A natural and damning question follows immediately. Is this harmony, or is it a courteous disguise for a far more radical view? Perhaps the philosophers privately hold the truth, while religion is, for the masses, a useful fiction. The 20th century scholar Leo Strauss read thinkers like Ibn Rushd in roughly this way. He saw them as masters of writing on two levels at once. One message ran on the surface, safe for the authorities and the crowd to read. Another ran between the lines, for the rare reader sharp enough to catch it. On that reading, the harmony thesis is itself the surface teaching, the safe public face. And Ibn Rushd's true view would be more secular and more dangerous than he could ever state. There is textual fuel for the suspicion, which makes it impossible to wave away. In his commentary on Aristotle's Metaphysics, he distinguishes a general law for everyone. Against it, he sets a law that is specific to the philosophers, belonging to them alone. It can sound as though philosophy is a higher path that quietly transcends the religion of the masses. But intellectual honesty demands we present the other side at full strength. The unity reading pushes back hard, and the texts genuinely refuse to settle the matter. Ibn Rushd never says the two laws conflict, only that the specific completes the general. It relates to it as a part to a whole, not as a rival to an enemy. And he insists tirelessly that the law is true and binds the philosopher as much as anyone. Philosophers, he says, must pray and obey, taking the highest road, but not the only one. So whether the harmony is sincere conviction or careful strategy remains genuinely open. After 8 centuries, the most honest answer is that we do not know. One thread of his legacy demands a brief warning here, to be unwound much later. His followers in Christian Europe would be accused of a doctrine of double truth. That is the claim that something can be true in philosophy and false in religion. Ibn Rushd held the precise opposite, since truth for him is one. That misreading has its own dark story. For now, the harmony principle says a real demonstration can never truly oppose the law. That holds easily enough while the demonstrations stay safely abstract. But Ghazali had refused to stay abstract, and that is the trouble. He had named specific philosophical conclusions and branded them outright unbelief. And the deepest of his charges was not really about a verse of scripture at all. It was about a piece of cotton and a flame. Before you can ask whether the world was created or eternal, you must ask something more basic. When fire touches cotton and the cotton burns, what is it that actually does the burning? Part 5. The Fire and the Cotton. Hold a flame against a piece of cotton and watch what happens. The cotton darkens, catches, and burns away to ash. Everyone says the fire burned it, that the fire is the cause, and the burning the effect. And we say the connection is necessary, that fire simply must burn cotton. Ghazali, one of the most penetrating minds in history, says, "Stop and look harder. What precisely did you observe?" You saw the flame make contact with the cotton, and you saw the cotton burn. That is 2 events, one beside the other, in close succession. You did not see any burning power leap from the fire into the fabric. You saw contact, and you saw combustion, and nothing whatsoever passing between them. The necessity you feel so strongly is not out there in the world. It is a habit worn into your mind by witnessing the 2 events together 1,000 times. This is a formidable argument, and Ghazali is not playing skeptical games for sport. He is defending the power of God, and the move is deadly serious. Suppose fire burns by its own necessary nature, built into what fire is. Then God could not stop it, and a miracle of fire that does not burn becomes impossible. So Ghazali takes the bold path and denies that fire has any causal power at all. The true cause of every event, he concludes, is God, acting directly. Fire and burning occur together, not because the fire does anything to the cotton. They occur together because God, in his settled habit, creates the burning when the contact happens. This is the view called occasionalism, and the name captures it exactly. The fire is merely the occasion for the burning, while God alone is its cause. On this picture there are no real causes anywhere in nature, only God's will, moment by moment. The whole machinery of the world is an illusion laid over the bare activity of God. This should sound eerily familiar, because 6 centuries later David Hume said something close. When we examine causation honestly, Hume argued, we never observe a necessary connection. We find only constant conjunction, one kind of event reliably followed by another. The feeling of necessity, he said, is produced in us by custom and habit. The line of descent is real, running through the occasionalist philosopher Malebranche. Hume read Malebranche closely, and Malebranche stands in a tradition with roots in this very debate. But careful scholars insist on a distinction here, and the distinction matters. Ghazali's denial of necessity is theological, a claim about what truly exists. There are no necessary connections, he says, because God is the real and only cause. Hume's denial is epistemological, a claim about what we can know. Perhaps there are necessary connections, and perhaps not, but we can never rationally justify the belief. They arrive near the same place from opposite directions, and collapsing one into the other distorts both. Now we come to Ibn Rushd's reply, which is one of history's great defences of causation. He is appalled by occasionalism, and his counterattack goes straight for its foundation. To deny that things have causal powers, he argues, is to deny that things have natures at all. Let us lay the argument out as a chain of premises, so you can judge it yourself. The first premise is that a thing's nature simply is what it characteristically does. Fire's nature is to heat and to burn, and water's nature is to cool and to wet. The second premise follows from the first with uncomfortable speed. If fire did not necessarily burn, then there would be nothing that fire is. The word fire would pick out no definite thing, no stable nature in the world. The third premise widens the damage to everything that exists. If nothing has a definite nature, then nothing has a definition, and nothing can be told apart from anything else. The conclusion, in his own words, is that all things would be one. Sit with how devastating that conclusion is meant to be. The occasionalist set out to exalt God above a world of competing causes. But he has ended by dissolving the world into an indistinct blur. Nothing is anything in particular, because nothing does anything of its own. Fire, water, stone and flesh become mere names for a single undifferentiated stuff. The price of denying causes is the erasure of every distinction between things. Then Ibn Rushd lands a counterstroke of almost surgical cruelty. The entire point of religion, Ghazali would surely agree, is that the world points to God. The order and design of creation is supposed to be evidence of a wise maker, but that inference works only if effects genuinely flow from causes. It works only if the world really is an ordered system of natures doing what they do. Deny causation, and you do not just lose science, you lose the road from the world back to God. The reversal is complete, and it is exact. Occasionalism, designed to protect God's power, has quietly destroyed the proof of God's existence. The great defence of the faith has sawn through its own supporting beam, and there is a further loss, because for Ibn Rushd, causation is the ground of all knowledge. To know a thing, in the fullest sense, is to know its causes. A world stripped of real causes is a world that cannot be understood, only gaped at. So Ghazali's position, taken to its honest end, terminates in total skepticism. We could expect nothing, predict nothing, and explain nothing whatsoever. Each moment would be a fresh, unconnected act of God, owing nothing to the moment before. The cost of saving the single miracle is the abolition of the entire intelligible world. That, for Ibn Rushd, is a price no sane person should ever agree to pay. Better a world of real fire that really burns, and a God who works through it. This exact fault line still runs through the philosophy of science, and each side has a name. On one side is the Humean view, that the laws of nature are nothing but regularities. They are patterns in how events happen to follow each other, with no deeper necessity beneath. On the other side is what philosophers now call the causal powers view. On this view, properties simply are powers, and a thing's nature is what it must do. The laws of nature flow out of these real powers, rather than being stamped onto a passive world. Ibn Rushd is the distant ancestor of that second camp. When a thinker today says salt dissolves because of what salt essentially is, they echo him. When another replies that there is only the regularity, the brute pattern, they echo Ghazali. The quarrel over a flame and a piece of cotton is, in its very structure, still unsettled. We have vastly more data than they did, and far better instruments. We have not closed the question of what a cause underneath everything actually is. There is one last place this argument bites, and it is where the whole thing turns personal. If the world is a tight web of necessary causes, what becomes of human choice? Here Ibn Rushd has to steer a narrow course between two disasters. The theologians, with their God who causes everything directly, had made human beings into puppets. Their opponents had made us the sole authors of our acts, tearing us out of God's order. Ibn Rushd wants neither the puppet nor the runaway. His position is that our acts have genuine internal causes, that our will and deliberation are real, but those causes operate within the larger order of the world, not outside it. We are free in that our choices are truly ours and truly bring about our actions. We are not free in the sense of standing somewhere beyond the web of causes entirely. Whether this secures a meaningful freedom or merely relocates the determinism was debated then and now. The scholar Caterina Bello has shown how delicately and how incompletely he balances chance, necessity, and choice. So Ibn Rushd has won his war against the occasionalists decisively. The world stands restored as a real system of causes and natures, ordered and knowable. But that victory carries a price he now has no choice but to pay. A world of fixed natures, running by its own eternal regularities, looks less like something switched on. It looks more and more like something that simply always was. Aristotle had said exactly that the world had no beginning at all. And of every doctrine the philosophers held, an eternal, uncreated world was the very first that Ghazali had condemned. To follow his own argument, Ibn Rushd must now defend a universe with no beginning and find God somewhere inside it. Part 6. A World with No Beginning. Ibn Rushd has just won his war for a world of real causes. That victory hands him a problem that he cannot escape. A world of fixed natures running by eternal regularities looks like something that always was. Aristotle had said exactly that the cosmos never began and will never end. And of all the philosophers' claims, this was the first that Ghazali branded unbelief. To follow his own reasoning, Ibn Rushd must now defend a universe with no beginning. Start with the view he has to overturn, because it is the natural one. Almost everyone believed the world was made at a moment, out of nothing, by God. Before that moment, there was God alone, and then, by a free choice, a world. This fits the plain words of Scripture, and it fits a deep intuition. Things around us begin and end, so surely the whole collection of things began too. A universe with no first moment feels less like creation and more like a brute fact. His answer turns on a distinction between two completely different kinds of causal order. The first he calls an essential ordering, and the crucial thing is that it works all at once. Think of a hand moving a stick that pushes a stone across the ground. The hand, the stick, and the stone act together in a single connected moment. Remove the hand right now, and the whole motion stops right now. Each earlier member holds the later one in being at the very same instant. A series like that, he argues, cannot stretch backward forever. If it did, you would have an actual infinity of movers, all working at once. And an infinite chain acting in one moment could never deliver any motion at all. The causal power would have to cross infinitely many links before reaching the stone. So an essential series must end in a first member that moves without being moved. This first member is the unmoved mover, the source the whole simultaneous chain depends on. The second kind of order is entirely different, and it unfolds across time. He calls it an accidental ordering, and his example is the cycle of weather. Rain comes from a cloud, the cloud from rising vapour, the vapour from an earlier rain. Here each cause does its work, and then perishes, handing off to the next. The father dies, but the son he produced lives on, and fathers a son in turn. There is no infinity acting all at once, only a succession marching back through time. This is the move that lets him keep both an eternal world and a first cause. The chain of events in time can run backward forever, with no first day. But the world as a whole, at every moment, hangs from an unmoved mover now. God is not the first event in a sequence, the way a creation would be. God is what sustains the entire system in existence at this instant and every instant. Eternity in time and dependence on God are, for Ibn Rushd, perfectly compatible. But what kind of cause is this God, if he did not push the world into being? Here Ibn Rushd says something that sounds strange to anyone raised on creation. God does not move the world the way one rolling ball strikes and moves another. God moves the world the way a beloved moves a lover, without lifting a finger. The heavens turn because they desire and imitate the perfect being at the summit. God is the final cause, the object of cosmic longing, not an engineer who builds. This raises a question that scholars still argue over, about how free this God really is. If the world flows from God's nature the way light flows from the sun, is it chosen? A lamp does not decide to shine. It simply shines because of what it is. If God produces the world just by being God, the world looks necessary, not freely willed. Ibn Rushd insists God is in some sense an agent who wills, creates, and intends, but he strips those words of everything that would imply change or deliberation in God. The scholar Katerina Belo has shown how hard it is to pin down where he lands. Necessity and freedom blur together in his God, and he may never fully resolve the strain. This exalted God raises the hardest question in the system, and Ibn Rushd faces it directly. If God's only object of thought is his own perfection, does God know the world at all? Ghazali had named this a second unbelief, the claim that God ignores particular things. Does God know that this person in this city is suffering at this very moment? To say no seems to insult God, and to say yes seems to drag him into change. For if his knowledge tracked passing events, his mind would shift as the events shifted. His reply is subtle, and it rests on a difference in the direction of knowing. Our knowledge runs from the world into us, because things cause our ideas of them. I know the fire is hot because the hot fire acts upon my senses. God's knowledge runs the other way, from God into the world as its cause. God does not learn the world by observing it the way a spectator would. God knows the world by knowing himself as the source from which it flows. So his knowledge is neither universal nor particular in our sense, but a third thing. It is the knowledge a maker has of his work, not the knowledge an onlooker collects. A small example makes the difference vivid if we compare two ways of knowing a building. A tourist learns the cathedral by walking through it, gathering its details into his memory. His knowledge depends on the building, and would change if the building were altered. The architect knew the cathedral before a single stone was laid in the plan itself. Her knowledge did not come from the building came from her knowledge. God, for Ibn Rushd, is the architect and never the tourist of everything that exists. From this follows his view of providence, which is generous and impersonal at the same time. God's care extends over the whole order of nature, holding the entire system together. But no single individual receives special divine attention aimed at them in particular. The sun warms everyone, yet it does not single out one farmer's field for favour. The order is a gift to all of creation, not a series of private interventions. This is a God of cosmic design, not a God who answers one prayer over another. He builds all of this against a rival he respected and relentlessly attacked, Avicenna. Avicenna had tried to prove God purely through concepts without leaning on the physical world. He argued that everything is either a necessary being or a merely possible one. Possible things need a cause, so the chain must rest on one necessary being, which is God. Ibn Rushd rejects this whole approach as theology dressed up in the costume of proof. You cannot reach the real God, he insists, by shuffling definitions inside your head. You must start where Aristotle started, from motion in the world that you can see. The only scientific road to God runs through physics, from the moving world to its mover. For everyone who cannot follow that proof, he offers two simpler and more popular paths. The first is the argument from providence, which points to the fit between the world and life. Day and night, the seasons, the rains, all seem arranged to make living things possible. The second is the argument from invention, which points to the rise of life from non-life. That perception and thought emerge from mere matter suggests a maker behind the arrangement. These are the proofs of the Quran, he says, open to every level of mind. So Ibn Rushd has given us a magnificent and distant God. He is pure thought, thinking only himself, moving all things as the object of their love. He knows you, but only as a maker knows a ripple in the order he causes. He provides for the whole, yet never bends to the fate of any single person. A natural question presses in. What sort of being could even climb toward knowing this God? Answering that means turning to the human mind and to his strangest doctrine of all. But there is a prior puzzle to settle first, about the man doing all this thinking. We keep calling him the faithful commentator on Aristotle. It is time to ask whether he was. Part 7. The commentator was not faithful. For 4 centuries Europe called him the commentator, and the title carried a quiet verdict. It said he was Aristotle's loyal voice, a clarifier who added no ideas of his own. He seemed to confirm it himself with a startling line about Aristotle's achievement. No one in 1500 years, he wrote, had added a word worth attention. From a man who said that, you expect careful transmission and little invention. The truth, recovered only recently, is close to the opposite. The case for the faithful commentator is real, and we should state it fairly. Ibn Rushd genuinely believed Aristotle had brought human knowledge very near to completion. His life's labour was explaining that achievement line by line against later distortion. He fought to recover the real Aristotle from the Neoplatonic editions of thinkers like Avicenna. On its face, that is a conservative project, the work of a restorer, not a rebel. For a long time, scholars read him exactly that way, as Aristotle's patient mouthpiece. The scholar who shattered that picture most decisively is Ruth Glasner. She was the first to read across the full range of his writings on physics. That meant working through texts that survive only in Hebrew, which earlier scholars had ignored. What she found was not a steady transmitter, but a restless mind that kept changing its position. On the basic structure of matter and the nature of motion, he revised his views more than once. The commentaries were not a transcription. They were a laboratory where he tested and rebuilt physics. Take the question of what the world is ultimately made of at the lowest level. Beneath every changing thing, Aristotle posited a bare substratum he called prime matter. Ibn Rushd tries to say what this is and lands on a genuinely strange answer. Try to picture stuff with no shape, no size, no colour, no quality whatsoever. You cannot, because there is nothing there to picture, only pure potential to become. Prime matter, he says, sits halfway between absolute nothing and actual being. Then he makes a move whose consequences run all the way to modern science. The very first thing this bare matter takes on, he argues, is not heat or colour. It is three-dimensional extension, the property of simply taking up space. Before matter is anything in particular, it is already something stretched out in length, width, and depth. One scholar, Arthur Hyman, argued this is a first step toward a famous later idea. It points toward Descartes 5 centuries on, who defined physical matter as nothing but extension. This extended matter also solves a problem you may never have thought to ask. Why is there more than one thing in the world, rather than a single object? Ibn Rushd's answer is that extension is what makes multiplicity possible in the first place. Because matter is spread out in space, many different forms can occupy different regions of it. Strip away the extension, he says, and only one form could ever exist at a time. Space itself, on this view, is the reason the world contains many things, and not one. His restlessness shows even more clearly in how he explains where living forms come from. Early in his career, he thought nature alone could not produce the form of a living thing. Something extra was needed, a celestial giver of forms that injected life from above. The order of the heavens reached down and stamped the form of the animal into matter. Late in his career, he abandoned this and moved toward a far more naturalistic view. Matter itself, he came to hold, already contains the potential for all forms, waiting to be drawn out. That shift matters because it shows the direction his mind was travelling over decades. He was steadily pushing the supernatural out of nature, handing more of the work to natural causes. The young Ibn Rushd needed the heavens to explain a living body coming to be. The old Ibn Rushd needed only matter, a natural agent, and the ordinary order of things. This is not a man parroting a fixed doctrine he inherited from a Greek book. This is a man rethinking the foundations and following his own arguments where they led. His boldest departure of all concerns the structure of body and motion themselves. Aristotle's entire physics rests on the claim that matter can be divided without limit. Cut any piece of stuff in half, and each half can be halved again forever. Glasner shows that Ibn Rushd, wrestling with cracks in Aristotle's own text, came to deny this. He argued instead for smallest parts, actual minimal pieces that cannot be divided further. Glasner gives this a name, Aristotelian atomism, a finite grainy world built from least units. Sit with how radical that is from the man supposedly defending infinite divisibility. On his mature view, a physical body is made of real building blocks with a smallest size. Motion, too, becomes grainy, composed of least steps rather than a perfectly smooth flow. And this grainy structure, Glasner argues, opens room for a world that is not strictly determined. Ideas later credited to European scholastics turn out to have originated with him first. The faithful Commentator was quietly building a physics that broke with the master he served. There is a contemporary echo here, though it must be stated with care. One of the deepest open questions in physics is whether space and matter are infinitely divisible. or whether, at the smallest scales, the world is grainy, built from indivisible least quantities. Ibn Rushd did not anticipate modern physics, and we should not pretend that he did. But the question he was forced to confront is recognizably the same structural question. Is the fabric of the world smooth all the way down, or does it come in smallest pieces? So the title Europe gave him turns out to be a kind of historical accident. He became the commentator because that is the role his commentaries played in foreign universities. Read whole, and read in the order he wrote them, he is something else entirely. He is a systematic and original thinker, hiding his innovations inside the humble form of commentary. This reframing matters for everything that follows, and especially for one final doctrine. Because if his physics was a moving target he revised for years, the same is far more true of his theory of mind. That theory is the most reworked, most daring thing he ever produced. It took him from a position he had once called repulsive to a conclusion almost no one had dared. It would later be condemned in Paris and named the chief Averroes heresy. The claim is simple to state and very hard to accept. The mind that does your thinking is not yours. Part 8. The mind you do not own. Here is a fact about yourself that seems too obvious to question. When you solve a problem or grasp an idea, it is you in your own head who thinks. Your mind is yours, private, sealed inside your skull, as personal as anything could be. Ibn Rushd came to deny this after years of struggle against his own earlier revulsion. He concluded that the part of you that thinks in concepts is not individually yours at all. To see how a careful mind reached so wild a place, you have to feel the trap he was in. The trap is built from 3 claims, and the trouble is that each one looks true. The first claim is that human beings think in abstractions, in universals. You do not just see this particular triangle, you grasp the triangle in general. You hold the idea of human being, which fits every person and is identical to no one. The second claim is that no bodily organ could ever do this kind of thinking. The third claim is that human beings are, through and through, bodily creatures. The first and third claims are easy to accept, so the weight falls on the second. Why think that abstract thought cannot be the work of a physical organ like the brain? Ibn Rushd inherits a sharp argument from Aristotle, and it runs through the eye. The eye can see every colour precisely because the eye itself has no colour of its own. If your lens were tinted red, every object would look red, and true seeing would fail. A receiver of all colours must itself be colourless, free of the very thing it takes in. Now apply that to a faculty meant to grasp the natures of all things whatsoever. To receive the form of every kind of thing, it must itself be no particular kind of thing. But every physical organ is a particular thing, made of particular matter, with its own nature. A brain is a specific lump of tissue, as red-tinted in effect as that coloured lens. So whatever thinks all forms cannot be a body or a power housed in a body. The second claim now stands on a real argument, and the 3 together cannot all be true. Something has to give, and Ibn Rushd watched every easy escape route collapse. Some had said the thinking power is just a disposition built into the body. But then it would be corporeal, and the argument from the coloured lens defeats it. Others had said each person has their own individual immaterial mind, one soul, a piece. But an immaterial thing made individual by a particular body would receive particular forms, not universals. Every halfway house on inspection failed to hold all three claims at once. So Ibn Rushd took the leap that the logic seemed to force on him. The thinking intellect, he concluded, is not corporeal and is not individual either. It is a single, separate, eternal substance, and it is one and the same for all human beings. There is, in the strictest sense, one mind doing the conceptual thinking of the whole species. He called it the material intellect, a poor name, since it is not made of matter. It is called material only because, like matter, it is a pure capacity to receive. He knew exactly how shocking this was, and he did not pretend otherwise. He wrote that the view came to him only after long reflection and intense care. He admitted he had never found it in any thinker who came before him, and in an earlier work he had called such an idea outright repulsive. This is not a man reaching casually for paradox to seem clever. This is a man dragged against his own taste to a conclusion he could not refute. The obvious objection arrives at once, and it is the one that will haunt him. If we all share one intellect, how can any thought ever count as mine? When I work through a proof, surely it is me thinking, not some cosmic shared mind. His answer rests on something the separate intellect cannot do without, namely images. The intellect never thinks in a vacuum. It always thinks about images drawn from the senses. And those images come from individual bodies, from my eyes, my memory, my particular brain. So the picture is a partnership between the one intellect and the many bodies. I gather images of the world through my senses and hold them in my imagination. The shared intellect works upon the images that I, in particular, supply to it. Because I control which images are present, I trigger and steer the thinking that occurs. The thought happens on my material, prompted by me, so he counts it as my thought. Each of us, in this way, partly governs the operation of the single intellect we share. This is where modern readers feel a jolt of recognition, and the comparison is now standard. In recent Philosophy of Mind, Andy Clark and David Chalmers proposed the extended mind. They argued that thinking need not stop at the boundary of the skull. Their example is a man with memory loss who records everything in a notebook. The notebook does the work memory does, so it counts as part of his mind. The Stanford Encyclopedia notes that Ibn Rushd gives the first developed version of this idea. The resemblance is real, but his version is stranger and goes further than theirs. Clark and Chalmers extend the mind outward into tools, into props beyond the body. Ibn Rushd puts the thinking subject itself outside the body and makes it shared. It is not that your mind reaches into a notebook that stays your own. It is that the thinker doing your conceptual work was never yours alone to begin with. The cognitive system for him does not just extend past you. Its core is held in common. But why must the intellect be one for everyone, rather than one private mind each? His strongest argument here is about teaching, and it is worth slowing down for. Imagine a teacher conveying the Pythagorean theorem to a room full of students. If the concept in the teacher's mind were a different item from the concept in each student's mind, what is transmitted? For real teaching to occur, the very same concept must become present to teacher and learner alike. Numerically identical knowledge shared between minds seems to require a genuinely shared intellect. Now the critique must be given at full force, because the greatest mind of the age delivered it. In 1270, Thomas Aquinas wrote a furious treatise titled On the Unity of the Intellect. His central objection is an image as sharp as Ibn Rushd's own coloured lens. Consider a wall with a patch of colour, and an eye that sees that colour. The colour is in the wall, and the eye sees it, but the wall itself does not see. The wall is the thing seen, never the thing that does the seeing. Aquinas turns this against the whole doctrine with deadly precision. On Ibn Rushd's view, my images sit in me, and the separate intellect understands them. So I am like the wall. My images are understood, but I no more understand than the wall sees. The understanding happens in the separate intellect, while I merely supply the coloured surface. It becomes impossible, Aquinas concludes, to say that this man, this particular human, thinks. And he insists he is beating Ibn Rushd on philosophy, not merely waving the banner of faith. Does Ibn Rushd have a reply, or has Aquinas simply ended the argument? His defenders point back to the intimacy of the partnership, to my control over the images. The wall is passive, but I actively gather, hold, and direct what the intellect thinks. Whether that activity is enough to make me the genuine thinker is exactly the open question. Modern scholars like Richard Taylor and Stephen Ogden take his position seriously, not as a blunder. But the worry Aquinas pressed has never been cleanly answered, and it remains alive. There is one more consequence of this doctrine, and it is the most personal of all. The shared intellect is eternal, while your body and your senses are not. The only part of you that thinks in concepts is the part that was never yours alone. So when your body dies, the thinking does not die, but neither does it remain yours. It returns, you might say, to the one mind it always belonged to, which forces the hardest question a human being can ask. When you die, does anything of you survive? Part 9. What survives is not you. Every religion that promises an afterlife promises something very specific. It promises that you will survive, the same person, with your memories and your loves intact. Islam, in Ibn Rushd's world, taught this vividly, as the resurrection of the body. The dead would rise in their flesh, and each person would meet their own judgment. This was the third doctrine on which Ghazali had condemned the philosophers as unbelievers, and Ibn Rushd's system, followed honestly, cannot deliver the promise as the believer hears it. The difficulty grows directly out of his theory of the soul. For Ibn Rushd, your soul is the form of your particular body, and is tied to it. What makes your soul yours, and not someone else's, is precisely that it animates your body. The body is the principle that individuates one soul from another, that keeps them distinct. So a question sharpens to a fine point. Subtract the body, and what is left to tell two souls apart? If nothing distinguishes them, then the very idea of many separate surviving souls dissolves. Ibn Rushd follows this thought to a conclusion most people find chilling. If something of the soul outlasts the body, he says, it cannot be many. It must be one in number. Picture two identical drops of water that fall and merge into a single pool. Once they join, there is no fact about which drop is which, because nothing separates them. Strip away the bodies that kept souls apart, and they collapse into one in just this way. What persists is not a crowd of individuals, but something single and shared. So the immortality his philosophy allows is not the immortality of the person. It is the eternity of the intellect and the eternity of the human species as a whole. The thinking goes on forever, but not as your thinking, with your particular history. The you who has these memories, this name, this one life, does not appear to continue. This is a long way from rising in your own flesh to be judged for your own deeds. It is eternity drained of everything personal, eternity without the individual who wanted it. And yet there is a positive vision here, not merely a denial, and it is demanding. Ibn Rushd holds out a supreme human achievement he calls conjunction. Through a life of contemplation, a person can climb from scattered concepts toward their source. At the peak, the mind grasps not this fact or that one, but the intellect behind all facts. In that moment, he says, a human being becomes like one of the eternal beings. He even writes that such a person is, in a sense, made like unto God. But look closely at what is being promised, because it is easy to misread. This is not you, preserved with your attachments, carried forward into endless life. It is the impersonal intellect within you reaching its highest possible activity. The reward is real, but it is the perfection of thought, not the survival of a personality. The mystic's union and the believer's heaven are not the same destination. One keeps the self and crowns it. The other transcends the self and leaves it behind. Honesty requires saying that scholars do not fully agree about his final view. Richard Taylor and others have shown how tangled and shifting his statements on this are. Exactly what conjunction involves and how much of the person it preserves is disputed, but the dominant reading is the stark one we have been tracing here. Personal immortality, the survival of you as a distinct individual, does not survive his logic. The texts resist a tidier, more comforting answer, however much we might wish for one. How does this square with his grand claim that reason and revelation never truly conflict? Here the layered reading from earlier does its quiet and to some suspicious work. For most people, the image of bodily resurrection is true in the only form they can use. It moves them toward justice and restraint, and that effect is real and good. Ibn Rushd refuses to deny resurrection in public and says it must be affirmed. The philosopher simply understands its inner meaning, while the believer holds the saving image. This is exactly the kind of move that made later readers cry foul. It can look as though the philosopher privately believes one thing and publicly affirms another. That suspicion would harden, in Christian Europe, into a charge we will meet at the end. For now, hold the structure in view, rather than rushing to judge his sincerity. The same truth, he maintains, is reached as image by the many and as understanding by the few. Whether that is a noble harmony or a careful evasion is a question we have not closed. Beneath all of this lies the most alien feature of his entire philosophy. For Ibn Rushd, the individual human being is not the ultimate point of the universe. The species is eternal, the intellect is one, and the single person is passing and replaceable. This offends the religious promise of personal salvation, which centers each soul before God. It equally offends the modern faith in the individual as the measure of all value. His cosmos simply was not built around you, and he saw no reason to pretend it was. There is a faint contemporary echo worth naming, but only faintly. Philosophers who study personal identity still cannot fully say what makes you the same person over time. Some have even argued that personal survival may not be what most deeply matters. Ibn Rushd would not have framed it that way, and the resemblance is loose, not exact. But he too located what is highest in us in something beyond the particular self. The deepest thing in a human for him is impersonal, and we only borrow it for a life. If the individual is not the center of value, a practical question follows immediately. What then is the good life, and how should human beings live together? A philosophy that places worth beyond the single self points toward the community and the city. And here Ibn Rushd is unusual among great philosophers because he was a working judge. He had governed real disputes, served real rulers, and watched real power up close. So when he turns to politics, he writes from inside it, and what he says is bitter and bold. Part 10. The Philosopher Among Monsters. When Ibn Rushd turned to politics, he ran into a strange and revealing obstacle. The natural text to comment on was Aristotle's Politics, the master's work on the state. But that book, he tells us plainly, had never reached his corner of the world. It had not arrived on the peninsula in the Muslim West where he lived and wrote. So he did something that says a great deal about his independence of mind. He took up Plato's Republic instead and made it serve in Aristotle's place. There is a live scholarly puzzle even about how he read that substitute. Some experts doubt he had Plato's actual text in front of him at all. He may have worked from a compressed summary made by the physician Galen. Mahdi and others have weighed the evidence, and the question is not settled. What is clear is that he read Plato through a thoroughly Aristotelian lens, and he read both of them through the harsh political reality of his own Andalusia. His framework starts with a claim about ethics that sounds odd to modern ears. For Ibn Rushd, the study of virtue is not finally about perfecting yourself. Its real purpose, he says, is the governance of cities, the ordering of a whole people. This fits the anti-individualism we have already seen running through his thought. The point of a good person is not a private trophy, it is a well-run community. Ethics is the servant of politics, and the individual's excellence serves the common good. Happiness, on his account, comes in two very different forms for two different groups. For the rare philosopher, the highest happiness is intellectual perfection, the conjunction we discussed. For everyone else, the guide to flourishing is the revealed law, the wisdom of the Quran. The law arranges ordinary life, so that the many can live well without doing philosophy. Both groups can reach a genuine happiness by paths suited to what they are. The city's job is to make both kinds of life possible, the contemplative and the lawful. Then come the claims that make this commentary genuinely startling for its time. The first concerns women, and it cuts hard against the world he lived in. Women, Ibn Rushd argues, share the same fundamental nature as men. They are therefore fit to be guardians, philosophers, and even rulers of the city. Nothing in their nature, he says, bars them from the highest human activities. This is a remarkable thing to assert in the 12th century, and he does not flinch from it. He even attaches an economic argument that sounds eerily modern. In the cities he knows, women are confined to bearing children and serving the household. Kept that way, he writes, they come to resemble plants rather than full human beings, and a society that wastes the capacities of half its people pays a heavy price. That waste, he argues, is one of the genuine causes of poverty in such cities. Squander half your talent, and you should not be surprised to find yourself poor. The second startling move is his attack on the rulers of his own day. He uses the real dynasties of his region as live case studies in political decay. He traces how a virtuous order slides by stages into tyranny and corruption, and he aims sharp criticism at the Almohad regime he himself served. These were the very rulers who had commissioned his commentaries and made his career. He bites the hand that fed him in writing, with his eyes open to the danger. The third move is the most personal, and it reads like a confession. He describes the position of the true philosopher in a city like his own. Such a person, he writes, is like a man surrounded by ferocious beasts. He is exposed, isolated, and in constant peril from the powers around him. This is not abstract theory. It is autobiography wearing the mask of political philosophy. He is telling us, between the lines, exactly how unsafe his own life had become. And the warning proved accurate in the cruelest possible way. The bold critic of tyranny was himself caught by the tyranny he described. Late in life he fell from favour for reasons still not fully clear to us. He was exiled to a small town, his philosophical books restricted and reportedly burned. The man who said women should rule and that philosophers live among monsters was devoured by monsters. The philosophy that named the danger was consumed by the very danger it had named. After his death, the old story says, his philosophy simply died with him in Islam. On this telling, his intended audience ignored him, and his thought withered at home. But recent scholarship has shown that this familiar story is badly overstated. He had dozens of direct disciples, and his works were read for centuries in the region. His ideas reached Egypt, the Levant, and even Safavid Iran, used by scholars and teachers. Some who are remembered as enemies of philosophy quietly borrowed from his pages. Still, it is true that his influence at home never matched what happened elsewhere. The books that fell under suspicion in Cordova set other worlds on fire. They were carried into Latin Europe and into the Jewish academies and translated with hunger. There, the cautious Muslim judge became a revolutionary force and a lightning rod. Two religions would fight bitterly over the ideas we have spent this series unfolding, and the fight begins with something that should give us pause. It begins with a name that was not even his. Part 11. The Heresy that took his name. A thinker can lose control of his own name, and few lost it more completely than Ibn Rushd. In Latin he became Averroes, and around that name grew a movement called Averroism. The strange thing is how little Averroism sometimes had to do with what he actually argued. His name became a banner, a slogan, and finally an accusation, often detached from his texts. To understand his afterlife, you have to separate the man from the legend built on him. And the legend, in Christian Europe, began in admiration before it curdled into fear. The admiration came first, through a wave of translation in the 13th century. Beginning around 1220, his commentaries on Aristotle were rendered into Latin. Within a generation, scholars across Europe simply called him the Commentator. To study Aristotle at all was, in practice, to study Aristotle through Ibn Rushd. His readings became the standard tool in the new universities, in Paris above all. For a brief while, the brilliant Muslim explainer was an unquestioned guide. Then the contentious doctrines surfaced, and the mood turned sharply. The flashpoint was the one mind shared by all humanity from earlier in this series. To Christian theologians, that doctrine was not merely strange, it was catastrophic. If there is one intellect for everyone, then your soul does not survive as you. There can be no individual judgment, no personal heaven, no personal hell. The teaching struck at the very centre of Christian hope for the single person. The reaction came as formal condemnation twice at the University of Paris. In 1270, and again more sweepingly in 1277, lists of forbidden propositions were issued. Many of the banned claims were tied directly to Averroes' teaching. The one shared intellect was on the list, alongside the eternity of the world. So was the threat of determinism, the fear that philosophy left no room for free will. The most powerful institution of learning in Europe drew a hard line against him. The decisive intellectual response came from Thomas Aquinas, whom we met before. In 1270 he wrote On the Unity of the Intellect, against the Averroists. We have already seen his killer image, the coloured wall that is seen but does not see. On Averroes' view, he argued, you could never show that this man actually thinks. The crucial thing is how Aquinas chose to fight, on philosophical ground, not just religious ground. He wanted to defeat Averroes at reading Aristotle, beating the Commentator at his own craft. Now we reach the charge that has clung to Averroes' name for centuries. His Latin followers were accused of holding a doctrine of double truth. That is the claim that something can be true in philosophy and false in religion at once. Two contradictory statements on this view could both be true on their separate levels. It is the most famous thing associated with Averroism, and here is the irony. Ibn Rushd himself never held it, and it flatly contradicts his deepest principle. Recall his slogan from the decisive treatise, that truth does not oppose truth. For him there is one truth, reached by the many as image, and by the few as proof. That is the opposite of saying philosophy and religion can hold contradictory truths. The double-truth doctrine was an accusation aimed at his Latin disciples, not his own view. And even those disciples may not have held it as crudely as their accusers claimed. Under threat of condemnation, they often said they were only reporting what reason concludes. This is why historians now ask, pointedly, whether Averroes was even an Averroist. The figures most blamed, like Siger of Brabant, drew on more than Ibn Rushd alone. The scholar Fernand van Steenbergen preferred to call their movement radical Aristotelianism. The label Averroism on this view distorts both the followers and the man behind the name. It bundled a range of bold thinkers under one foreign scapegoat, convenient to condemn. The heresy that took his name was, in part, a heresy invented for it. There is a far happier chapter, and it unfolds in the Jewish world. The great philosopher Maimonides acquired the commentaries near the end of his life and praised them. That praise opened 4 centuries of intense Jewish fascination with Ibn Rushd. His standing grew so high that he came to supplant Aristotle himself as the authority. Jewish thinkers wrote commentaries on his commentaries, layers of explanation upon explanation. The philosopher Gersonides produced the most important of these in the 14th century. We owe an immense debt to that Jewish tradition, and it is concrete, not sentimental. A significant part of Ibn Rushd's work survives only in Hebrew translation today. The Arabic originals of some texts were lost, and the Hebrew versions preserved them. Ruth Glasner's revolution in reading his physics depended on exactly those Hebrew manuscripts. Condemned and burned in his own world, he was copied and treasured in another. Without the readers who loved him, parts of his mind would have vanished entirely. His European afterlife stretched on long past the Middle Ages into the Renaissance. At the University of Padua, Averroism survived into the 16th century. Thinkers like Pomponazzi and Zabarella kept arguing over the nature of the intellect. The question of whether the soul is individually immortal stayed genuinely open and contested. New editions of his commentaries kept appearing alongside fresh attacks and defences. For 3 centuries, European philosophy could not finish arguing with the Commentator. Then, after long neglect at home, Ibn Rushd returned to the Arab world, and by a strange route. In the 19th century, the French scholar Ernest Renan revived him in Europe. Renan painted Averroes as a hero of pure reason against religious authority. Arab intellectuals educated in France encountered this image and carried it home. It fed the Nahda, the Arab awakening that sought to wed Islam to modern reason. Ibn Rushd became a symbol of the claim that faith and rational inquiry can live together. In the 20th century, the Moroccan philosopher Mohammed Abed al-Jabiri pushed this further. He called for what he named a new Averroism as a path for the Arab future. The Arab world, he argued, had taken a wrong turn long ago in its intellectual history. It had followed an Eastern mystical irrationalist current rather than the Andalusian rationalist one. Recovery for al-Jabiri meant reclaiming Ibn Rushd's spirit of demonstration and intellectual honesty. It meant reviving his insistence that reason has its own rightful autonomy. But intellectual honesty demands we treat these revivals with a clear and critical eye. Al-Jabiri's grand story is itself contested, a modern project reading its needs into the past. The image of Averroes as a father of secular reason owes much to Renan and is disputed. Historians point out how pious, how genuinely Aristotelian, and how religious he actually was. So, even now, there is more than one Averroes competing for our attention. There is the symbol of reason, the careful Muslim Aristotelian, and the hidden radical of the esoteric reading. Stand back at the end and look at the whole shape of what this one man attempted. Ibn Rushd made a single wager, and he staked his life and his reputation on it. He bet that reason and revealed truth, pursued without flinching, can never finally collide. Following that bet, he reached a world with no beginning, and a God who knows you only as a maker knows his work. He reached one mind doing the thinking of all humanity, and a self that does not outlive its body. Two great civilizations recoiled from where the argument had taken him. And yet the deeper wager beneath all the specific doctrines is the one that endures. It is the refusal to let the difficulty or the danger of an idea be a reason to look away. That refusal is the quiet engine of the science and the philosophy that came after him. The man Europe shrank into a footnote on Aristotle was among the boldest minds either tradition produced. What lives now is not his turning spheres or his single intellect, which we have left behind. What lives is his insistence that you follow the reasoning wherever it leads, and trust that truth cannot war with truth.